16 minutes past 6. The average pay of a FTSE 100 chief executive has reached almost £5 million a year. Joe's here.
Yes, Justin, thanks. Yeah, that's according to a new study out this morning from the think tank, the High Pay Centre. That £5 million average figure works out at 183 times the average salary in Britain. The top 10 highest paid chief executives brought in £156 million between them in 2014, prompting fresh calls for action to curb executive pay. Well, Deborah Hargreaves is the director at the High Pay Centre, and she joins us now. But also here to debate the issue is Kate Andrews from the free market think tank, the Adam Smith Institute. Let me start with Deborah. This is based on published FTSE 100 data, isn't it, Deborah?
Yes, this is from the company's own annual report, so it's a single figure that they produce for their chief executives. It includes their salary as well as their incentive plans, which are usually linked to the share price, big chunks of shares, pensions, bonuses, that sort of thing. So it includes everything, their whole package.
And you describe it as excessive.
Yes, it's gone up a lot. And even in the 5 years in which they've been publishing these figures, it's gone up by nearly £1 million. So it's also pulled away from the rest of the workforce. As we've been hearing, wages are starting to go up for everyone else, but they've been held down for a long time, almost 10 years. And there's a lot of catching up to do. So we've seen executive salaries pulling right away from the rest of society, creating this small elite of people that are just paid astronomically.
And what sort of solutions are you proposing, given the fact that this issue is getting more acute, as it were?
Well, shareholders now have a binding vote on pay policy every 3 years. They've only had that for a couple of years, so we haven't really seen much of a protest.
They haven't acted yet, though, have they, these shareholders who they own the companies?
That's right. And we don't think shareholders are really enough to hold these executives to account. And we've said that the remuneration committees that set this pay should have members of the workforce have a much broader membership and people who will introduce a little bit of common sense thinking into these pay discussions.
And would you like a kind of a German-style solution whereby workers are represented at board level?
Yes, there are some very sensible conversations going on in Germany over pay, and there have been workers on the boards who've voted to keep pay down and have pushed that through. And I think that, you need to link this pay somehow with what's going on for everyone else rather than just allowing it to carry on going ever upwards.
Let's bring in Kate Andrews from the Adam Smith Institute. Do you think bosses deserve 183 times the average salary in the UK?
It depends on the boss. It's always a unique scenario and a subjective scenario. The first thing I'd have to contest from what's been said so far is this idea that salaries at the top are taking away from worker salaries at the bottom. The report itself this morning has published that is an intuitive theory that would need further research. And I don't know of a single study or economist out there that thinks that wages are fixed in that way. It isn't the case that companies have a box of money and they shovel it out to people at the top and they throw the scraps to the people at the bottom. That's the same thing as suggesting that somebody who gets a raise requires somebody else to get a cut. We know that salaries don't work in that way.
But isn't it also true that in real terms there has been a pay cut until very recently, a year ago, there has been a real terms pay cut in average salaries. There's been no real terms pay cut in CEO salaries.
That's true. And if we want to talk about giving more money to people at the bottom and giving more money to average workers and talking about a living wage or a minimum wage, then that's a debate that we can have. But it has no connection to CEO pay. And that's the real key to take away. And today we're talking about CEO pay and whether or not these people at the top deserve that kind of money. And the reality is that CEOs matter much more today than they did 30 or 40 years ago. Big companies can be made or completely broken by a few key decisions at the top. We saw that with Kodak back in 2011, a company that for many, many years was at the very, very top went bankrupt because people at the top, their CEO and their executives, decided not to invest in digital cameras. We've seen this on the flip side. We've seen Steve Jobs come in and completely turn a failing company around. Apple was on the brink of bankruptcy by implementing new and innovative ideas. But these are gambles, these are risks that people at the top have to take. And we see that shareholders and investors are willing to pay an incredible amount of money for the value that they think these people bring to the company.
Can I stop? Shareholders necessarily, they've had options to vote against these policies and haven't exercised them yet in this country. Mm-hmm. But share values have stagnated at best, whilst the pay that the bosses are getting have soared. Surely shareholders need to do a lot more.
Well, if anything, that tells you that the shareholders are voting on more than just the money that's coming into them and coming into their profits. What they're trying to do is assess what somebody can create in terms of value into the future. And a lot of times when they set these salaries, they're not just looking at what the person is worth in that moment. It's what kind of value can you bring to the company down the line. We saw that with Microsoft. We saw that Steve Ballmer he brought the company from 20 billion to up to 75 billion, and still he was fired because the shareholders didn't think he was making good enough
decisions. And shares
decisions.
surged when he decided to announce he was
They
stepping
did.
down. Let me go back to Deborah Hargreaves from the High Pay Centre. Deborah, in the United States, the executive ratio is 300 to 1. It's only 183 here.
Yes, so we've got some way to go. I'd just like to pick up on a few points made before. That the fact that there's no connection between these CEO salaries and the rest of the workforce. You're seeing a lot of these CEOs now coming out and arguing against the living wage that George Osborne has suggested to be introduced, i.e. an increase in the minimum wage. And there is a connection there. They're unembarrassed about the fact that they're earning £5 million and they're arguing that they can't afford to pay the workforce that little bit extra that would bring them up to the living wage. So I do think there's a strong connection. I don't think it's right to say that they are separate. And there are a few exceptional CEOs. I would agree with that, but not all of them are like that by any means. A lot of them work their way up the ranks of these companies. They end up at the top. They become very lucky. They're rewarded with shares, largely without being able to influence the price of those shares. So the shares react to a global market, but not really through anything that the CEO is doing. Sometimes they do have a big impact on their company. I would accept that, but they're a few and far between.
OK, Deborah, thank you very much. Deborah Hargreaves there from the High Pay Centre, and Kate Andrews from the free market think tank, the Adam Smith Institute. Our markets guest this morning is Ewan Sterling from Standard Life. Good morning, Ewan.